A cowboy stands by the dying fire, frost clinging to his hat brim. "I need to warm up my bed and you need shelter," he says, the words cutting through the cold night like a bullet. The wind howls across the plains, carrying smoke, guilt, and something unspoken between them. She doesn't flinch, just stares, one hand still clutching the small bundle she carries. Two strangers, one offer, and a storm closing in. But what happens when a deal made for survival stirs feelings neither can afford? The snow had started before sundown, fine dust that turned mean as night fell. By the time the cowboy spotted movement near the broken fence line, the wind was slicing sideways, erasing every track almost as fast as it formed. He pulled his coat tight, lantern swinging low. Out there, something shifted, a shadow that refused to vanish. She appeared first as a blur of color against the white, worn buckskin, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a child hidden beneath it. Her hair was matted with ice. The cowboy raised his lantern higher, saying nothing. He'd seen women like her before, driven from the mountains when the soldiers came through, but never one who walked straight toward him without fear. The wind roared between them, carrying the smell of smoke from his cabin. He motioned toward it. She hesitated, eyes darting to the open door, to the fire beyond. Then she stepped forward. Each movement looked like a choice between pride and freezing. Inside, the air was heavy with wood smoke and loneliness. Two small beds sat empty in the corner. He poured water into a pot, listening to it hiss over the coals. She stood by the door, still wrapped in the blanket, refusing the chair he offered. The silence between them was rougher than the wind outside. Finally he spoke, not kindly, not cruelly. "You can stay till the storm passes." His voice cracked from disuse. She gave a single nod. The baby stirred, a soft sound, fragile as breath. He turned away, stoking the fire, pretending not to look. Outside, the storm clawed at the roof. Inside, the room filled with the sound of wood settling, water boiling, and two strangers measuring what it costs to trust another soul. Then came the cry from the baby, sharp, cutting through the dark. He froze, hand hovering over the kettle. Something old and broken stirred in him, and that's when the wind slammed the cabin door open, scattering ash across the floor, an omen of trouble that neither of them could yet name. The door creaked back on its hinges, wind clawing through the cabin like it owned the place. The cowboy shoved it closed with his boot and slid the iron latch. For a while, neither of them spoke. The woman crouched near the fire, unwrapping the child with slow, practiced hands. The boy couldn't have been more than 2, thin, dark-eyed, breathing in soft rattles. She brushed melting snow from his hair, whispering words the cowboy didn't understand. He poured 2 tin cups of water, setting one near her without a word. She didn't thank him. She just watched the steam rise as if it carried some kind of warning. Outside, the wind screamed down the ridge, dragging loose planks against the stable wall. He hated that sound. It always reminded him of the night his wife had died, the roof gone before dawn, leaving nothing but silence. He reached for the poker, stirring the fire until it spat sparks. "You got far to go?" His voice barely carried over the wind. Her answer came soft, shaped by an accent older than the town itself. "No place to go." He nodded, more to himself than to her. "Then you'll stay till morning." The boy coughed again. She lifted him closer to the heat. "He needs food." He hesitated, then reached for the bread tin. The crust was hard, but he broke it anyway, setting a piece on a plate. She tore it small, fed it to the child bit by bit. The boy's fingers brushed hers, tiny, shaking, and something in the cowboy's chest twisted. He turned away, busying himself with the rifle leaning against the wall. The firelight caught on the metal, a thin glint like moonlight on a blade. "You got a name?" he asked. She looked up. "Names bring trouble." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." For a long time, there was only the sound of the fire and the baby breathing easier. Then came a distant thud, something heavy hitting the barn wall. The cowboy straightened, listening. Again, this time, closer. He set down the rifle, moving to the window. Outside, the yard was a blur of white. The lantern by the fence swayed hard, then went out. Only the faint glow of the storm gave shape to the snowdrifts. "Stay here," he muttered. She didn't argue. just pulled the child closer and watched him reach for his coat. When he stepped outside, the cold slammed into him like a hammer. Snow whipped across his face, stinging his eyes. The barn loomed black against the storm. Something moved near the door, a shadow, quick, low to the ground. He raised the lantern higher. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the wind. He took one step closer and saw them. Tracks. Boots. Not his. A figure stumbled out from behind the trough, thin, wild-eyed, half-frozen. The man's coat was army issue, torn at the shoulder. He lifted his hands, voice ragged. "Don't shoot. Just need a place to stay." The cowboy's gut tightened. He'd seen that look before, deserter's eyes desperate and cornered. He lowered the lantern, keeping his hand near the rifle. "There's a woman and a child inside," he said flatly. "You move wrong, I'll put you down." The stranger swallowed, nodding fast. "Ain't here for trouble, just warmth." A gust of wind cut between them, and for a heartbeat they both turned away from the sting. When the cowboy looked back, the man had dropped to his knees, coughing hard, blood speckling the snow. The cowboy swore under his breath. He could leave him there. Nobody would know. But the storm would kill the man in minutes. He stared at the trembling figure, at the red snow, at the open door of his cabin glowing faint through the dark. Duty or mercy? Same thing, sometimes. He grabbed the man by the collar and half dragged him toward the cabin. Inside, the woman stood clutching the child. Her eyes darted from the wounded soldier to the cowboy. "Found him near the barn," the cowboy said. "He's near dead." She stepped back, pressing her son to her chest. "White man, soldier." He hesitated. "Looks that way." For a moment, no one moved. The wind howled against the walls. Then the woman said something sharp in Apache, a sound like a curse and a prayer all at once. She knelt, ripped a strip from her blanket, and pressed it to the stranger's shoulder where the blood seeped through. The cowboy stared. She didn't look at him, just worked fast, hands steady, jaw tight. "Why help him?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flicked up, dark and cold. "Because he would not help me." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. He didn't answer, just knelt beside her, pressing the cloth tighter against the wound. The soldier groaned, fading fast. When she met his gaze again, there was no warmth, only understanding. Two kinds of survival, both ugly, both necessary. Then the wind slammed against the shutters, and something outside scraped across the wall, metal on wood. The cowboy looked up sharply. That wasn't the wind. The scraping came again, slow, deliberate, not the work of wind or branches. The cowboy froze mid-kneel, eyes narrowing toward the window. The Apache woman turned her face toward the sound, her hand hovering protectively above the boy's head. The wounded soldier stirred, muttering something between a prayer and a curse. The cowboy reached for his rifle. "Stay back." She didn't argue. She just pulled the blanket tight around the child and shifted closer to the hearth, the fire painting her in trembling orange light. Her eyes followed him as he stepped toward the door. He lifted the latch, letting in a knife of cold air. "Who's out there?" His voice was low, steady, dangerous, nothing. Then a thud, heavy, like a body dropping into snow. He pushed the door open wider, rifle raised. The wind howled through the frame, scattering ash. Just beyond the porch lay a horse, sides heaving, steam rising from its nostrils. The animal was saddled but riderless, reins dragging through the drifts. The cowboy's jaw tightened. The soldier groaned behind him. "My horse, it's ran when the shot came." "Shot?" The cowboy's tone sharpened. "Who's chasing you?" But the man's eyes had rolled back. He was half-conscious, lips moving without sound. The woman spoke, her English slow, careful. "If soldiers come, they take him. They take us too." He met her gaze, steady, fierce, unafraid. He thought of the tracks he'd seen near the barn, too many for one man. "You're right," he said quietly. "We'll bar the door." He moved fast, shoved the table against the frame, dropped the beam across the latch. The wind slammed again, furious, as if testing the cabin's resolve. Outside, faint beneath the storm, came another sound, the jingle of harnesses, men's voices trying to cut through the snow. The woman drew the boy close. They come. The cowboy checked his rifle, thumb brushing the worn wood. You know how to keep him quiet. She nodded once. The soldier stirred again, eyes wide with sudden fear. You don't understand, he rasped. They ain't my men, bounty-ed riders. Think I killed their sergeant. I didn't. He coughed hard, blood speckling his sleeve. They'll burn the place down to get me. The cowboy stared at him, cold realization sinking in. You brought trouble to my door. The man's breath rattled. Trouble was already here. He wasn't wrong. The woman's gaze shifted between them. Two sides of the same war tews, now trapped under one roof. Outside, hooves pounded closer. A voice shouted, muffled by the snow. You in there? Hand over the deserter, and we'll let the rest of you walk away. The cowboy's grip tightened on the rifle. Walk away to where? Into a storm? No answer. Just the sound of horses circling, boots crunching over ice. He glanced at the woman. There's a trap door under the floorboards. Old root cellar. Get the boy down there. She shook her head. And you? I'll buy time. Her eyes flashed. You fight for him? The white man who burned my people? He met her stare evenly. I fight for what's under this roof. For a long heartbeat, the air between them burned hotter than the fire. Then she turned, crouched, and pried up the loose plank beside the hearth. The boy whimpered once before she hushed him into silence. The cowboy stood by the door, rifle aimed, listening to the riders fan out. Boots hit the porch. A fist slammed against the frame. Last chance, friend. Step aside. He pulled the hammer back with a slow click. Come and take him. The first shot shattered the window. Glass and snow sprayed across the room. The woman flinched, shielding the child below. The soldier cried out, clutching his side. The cowboy fired once, clean, measured. A shape fell in the snow outside. The others shouted, scattered for cover. He ducked low, reloading fast, heart pounding steady as the ticking stove. From beneath the floor came the soft sound of the child's breath, the mother's whispered prayers in a language older than the land itself. He drew strength from it. Another bullet tore through the wall. Smoke drifted from the muzzle of his rifle. You best ride off, he shouted. There's no gold here, no vengeance worth dying for. But the storm swallowed his words. Through the white blur, he saw movement. 3 shadows regrouping near the fence. One held a torch. His stomach sank. Fire. The first spark hit the barn roof, catching dry hay. Flames leapt, orange against the snow. He turned toward the woman. Get ready to run. Her voice was iron. Where? He looked at the wounded man, pale and fading. Then at her, fierce as the wind. Anywhere that's still breathing. The crack of another gunshot split the night. The door shuddered. A bullet thudded into the wall inches from his head. He chambered another round, but before he could fire, a voice, familiar, broken, called from outside. Eli, you in there? The rifle froze in his hands. Only one man alive called him by that name. The cowboy froze, breath catching on the edge of that single word, Eli. It carved through the chaos sharper than any bullet. Outside and the storm howled, but he barely heard it. Memory roared louder. He stepped closer to the door, voice low and uncertain. Who's asking? The answer came with a bitter laugh. A man who's owed the truth. He knew that voice. 3 winters ago, it had belonged to the deputy who'd ridden beside him when the border turned to fire, when everything that mattered had gone up in smoke. Caleb Briggs. The cowboy, Eli, tightened his grip on the rifle. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, sensing something shift in the room. You know this man? She asked. Eli didn't answer. He looked through the broken glass at the shadow outside. You're a long way from Red Rock, Caleb. So are you, came the reply, and I'm guessing you've got company. The tone carried both accusation and familiarity, a friendship half buried, half rotten. Eli's gut turned. You ride with bounty men now. A pause. Not by choice. But when a deserter spills army blood, they start asking questions. Found tracks leading here. Eli glanced at the soldier slumped against the wall. The man was barely breathing. He's not worth dying over. Caleb's voice softened, almost regretful. Then step aside, brother. Let me take him and end this. The word brother hit like a shovel to the ribs. You ain't my brother anymore, Eli said. Outside, the storm hissed, swallowing silence between them. Then came movement, boots shifting, rifles cocking. More men behind Caleb. They hadn't come for talk. The Apache woman's voice sliced through the quiet. "They will not stop." "No," Eli said. "They won't." He turned toward her, his face drawn in firelight. "Get the boy ready. When I open that door, run for the ridge. There's a cave along the creek bed. Follow the wind, always to your left." Her chin lifted. "And you?" He gave a tight smile. "Someone's got to slow the fire down." She hesitated, searching his face for something, mercy, promise, maybe both. Then she nodded once. "We will go." The soldier stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open. "Don't let 'em hang me, cowboy," he whispered. "I didn't kill him." Eli crouched beside him. "Then you'd better make that worth something." He handed the man his spare revolver, cold steel and trembling fingers meeting in silence. Outside, Caleb called again, voice harder now. "Last chance, Eli, don't make me come through that door." Eli stood. "You always did hate knocking." He swung the door open wide, snow blasting in. A dozen shapes stood in the storm's haze, men in dusted coats, rifles glinting beneath a pale moon. Caleb at their center, face shadowed beneath a brim, heavy with guilt. "Step aside," Caleb said. "I'll tell him you weren't part of it." Eli raised his rifle. "You already know I was." The flash of gunfire ripped the night apart. He dove behind the doorframe, firing back twice. One man fell, the others scattered, shouting through the storm. Sparks leapt from the wood, bullets tearing through the cabin walls. "Go!" Eli shouted over his shoulder. The woman lifted the boy, ducking toward the trapdoor. The soldier dragged himself after her, jaw clenched in pain. For a heartbeat, Eli thought they might actually make it. Then Caleb's voice cut through again, closer now. "You can't hide her forever, Eli." Eli's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "The woman? You think the army doesn't know what you did? That you smuggled her out after the raid?" Caleb stepped into the light of the doorway, rifle trained steady. "That you buried the truth under your new name." The words hit like thunder. The Apache woman froze halfway through the hatch, eyes wide, realization dawning. Eli lowered his gun, heart hammering. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." Her voice was low, shaking with fury. "You were there." "I tried to stop it," he said. "I swear." But she wasn't listening anymore. The betrayal was louder than the storm. Outside, another torch landed on the barn roof. Fire flared higher, crackling against the wind. Caleb took another step forward, his face twisting. "You can't outrun it, brother." The past always burns back through. Eli's rifle trembled in his hands. Behind him, the woman's footsteps faded into the dark beneath the floor. He could still hear the boy crying softly, muffled by earth and wood. Eli took a slow breath, leveled his rifle again, and whispered, "Then let it burn around me." He fired. The shot cracked like lightning. Caleb staggered backward, his rifle dropping into the snow. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the hiss of wind and the distant roar of fire. Eli stood in the doorway, chest heaving, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. Then the other men opened fire. Bullets ripped through the wooden walls, splinters flying. Eli ducked low, reloading by feel, counting each round like a prayer. "Stay down!" he shouted, though the woman and child were already beneath the floor, sealed beneath the trapdoor. Outside, Caleb groaned, half buried in snow. One of his men crouched beside him. "He's hit bad." "Then burn 'em out," another yelled. Flames climbed the barn wall, leaping higher, their glow spilling orange across the white. Eli crawled to the window, sighting down his rifle. One rider lit another torch. He took the shot clean, one squeeze, one drop. The man folded without a sound. The others hesitated, realizing the cowboy inside wasn't going to beg. The snow fell heavier now, thick and fast, masking shapes in the dark. Eli could smell the smoke, bitter and close. The barn would go first, the cabin next. He glanced toward the floorboards, hearing faint whispers, the Apache woman soothing her child. Her voice was a thread of calm through the chaos, steady, rhythmic. It reminded him of lullabies he'd half forgotten, from a life long gone. He grit his teeth and turned back to the window. "Not tonight," he muttered. Then footsteps behind him, slow, barely audible over the storm. He spun, rifle raised. The wounded soldier stood there, pale as death, revolver trembling in his hand. "They're gonna kill us all," the man rasped. "We gotta give 'em what they came for." Eli's eyes narrowed. "You mean you—" The soldier nodded, face slick with sweat. "Ain't no saving me, but maybe they'll let you walk." "That's not how they work." The soldier's voice broke. "Then at least don't make her die for me." Eli took a slow step forward. "Put the gun down." But the soldier's hand shook harder. "Don't come closer." Another shot cracked from outside, shattering a window pane. Both men flinched. The soldier's revolver fired by reflex, a wild shot, missing Eli by inches, burning a hole through the doorframe. Eli lunged, knocking the weapon away. They struggled in the dim firelight, boots sliding across the floor. The soldier gasped, collapsing again as his wound reopened, crimson soaking through the makeshift bandage. Eli knelt beside him, gripping his collar. "You just bought us seconds, maybe less." The man's eyes fluttered. "Then make 'em count." Eli's throat tightened. He reached into the man's coat, pulling free a silver badge. Tarnished, bent. U.S. Cavalry. He stared at it for a long moment, then tossed it into the fire. It hissed, vanished in smoke. Outside a voice barked, "They're moving in." Eli slammed the door shut and dropped the iron latch. The heat from the barn pressed against the windows now, fire painting the snow orange-red. Through the smoke, he could see silhouettes fanning out, 6, maybe 7 men, too many. He looked down at the soldier, unconscious now, and then toward the floor. The child had gone quiet. He moved to the stove, grabbed a shovel, and dumped ashes across the floorboards, masking footprints. Then he doused the lamp, plunging the cabin into near darkness. The door rattled once, then again. A man's voice. "Cowboy, you still breathing in there?" Eli raised his rifle, crouched low beside the window. "Maybe," he said. "You can't win this." "Never was trying to." A pause. Then the voice changed, softer, almost pitying. "She's Apache, ain't she? You think they'll let you keep her alive if they find her? You're fighting for a ghost." Eli didn't answer. The silence stretched until the man outside finally muttered, "So be it." The next explosion blew the door clean inward. Eli was thrown against the wall, half blinded by smoke and flame. Shapes surged through the gap, men shouting, guns raised. He fired once, twice. A man fell screaming. Another rushed in, swinging the butt of his rifle. Eli blocked it with his forearm, drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest, and they both crashed into the table, splintering wood. The room became chaos, fire, shouting, bodies slamming against the walls. A bullet grazed Eli's cheek. Blood mixed with sweat, smoke, and snow. Then over the roar of it all came the sound he'd been praying not to hear, a thin cry from beneath the floorboards. The child. Eli's stomach dropped. One of the men froze mid-step, hearing it too. "There's more down there." Before he could move, Eli tackled him, dragging both into the firelight. The gun went off, too close, too loud. The man fell still, but the cry had given them away. Outside, Caleb's shadow moved in the fireglow. He was still alive, one arm clutching his side, eyes blazing with something between rage and sorrow. "You hit her, Eli. After everything they did, you hit her." Eli stood, rifle smoking, chest heaving. "I ain't hiding her. I'm protecting what's left." Caleb raised his pistol. "Then die for it." The cabin filled with heat and gun smoke, the air choking with ash. The rafters above began to groan, a long, splintering sound that meant only one thing. The fire had taken hold. Eli's lungs burned with every breath. He wiped blood from his face, eyes narrowing through the haze. Caleb stood in the doorway, one hand clutching his side, pistol leveled. "You'll burn this place to the ground just to make a point," Eli shouted over the roar. Caleb coughed, blood dark on his glove. "You think you can wash your hands clean, Eli? You rode with us when the orders came. You watched the smoke rise." Eli's knuckles whitened around his rifle. "And I never slept since." The flames licked higher, snapping through the roof beams. The soldier lay motionless beside the hearth, breath shallow. The Apache woman pressed herself against the cellar door, clutching her child. Beneath her calm, her eyes held something sharp, a truth she had kept hidden, even as death pressed close. Caleb stepped forward. "That woman! She's the one who escaped from Canyon Ridge, isn't she? The one they said carried the chief's bloodline." Eli said nothing, but the silence was an answer. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They'll never stop hunting her. You think one night in your bed will change what she is?" Eli raised the rifle. "No, but it might change what I am." The fire roared between them. Caleb steadied his pistol, eyes full of something between pity and hate. "Then I reckon this is where your road ends." A crack above them, the beam gave way. Eli dove aside as it crashed down, scattering sparks. In the split second of distraction, he fired. The bullet struck Caleb's shoulder, spinning him into the doorway. Caleb fell hard, gun slipping from his hand and vanishing into the snow outside. Eli pushed himself up, coughing. "You should have stayed gone," he said. Caleb laughed weakly. "You think you're any better than me? You think saving one woman saves you from all the others you left behind?" Eli didn't answer. He turned toward the floor, kicking the cellar hatch open. Smoke poured downward, curling into the dark. "Get up here," he called. The woman's voice rose from below. "It's burning too fast." He crouched, extending his hand. "There's a tunnel behind the barrels, old route path. It comes out by the creek. Go." She hesitated only a moment, then pushed the boy up into his arms. The child's face was streaked with soot, eyes wide. Eli handed him toward the window. "Hold him close," he said. "Don't stop running." The woman climbed out after him, coughing hard. Her gaze met Eli's, long, searching, filled with something too complex for forgiveness. "You come too," she said. "I will," he lied. A burst of gunfire tore through the doorway, bullets snapping inches from his head. Caleb, somehow still alive, dragging himself upright. "You can't save her, Eli," he shouted. Eli fired back once. Caleb dropped again, disappearing behind the smoke and snow. The gunfire outside faltered. The storm howled louder, as if nature itself wanted to erase the sound of men dying. He turned back to the woman. "Go. Follow the wind to your left." She hesitated, eyes glistening. "Why help me? After what you did?" "Because I was there," he said quietly, "and I should have been the one to burn." For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she reached forward, touched his hand once, a gesture half mercy, half farewell, and vanished into the snow with the boy in her arms. Eli watched until the storm swallowed her shadow. Then he turned back toward the cabin. The roof was collapsing now, tongues of flame licking across the walls. He limped toward the soldier's body, dragging it closer to the door. "You didn't make it easy," he muttered. "But no one dies forgotten out here." He pulled the man's dog tag from his neck, slid it into his pocket. Then, through the smoke, a weak voice called his name. Caleb. The man was half buried in snow, blood staining the drifts. Eli knelt beside him. "You got her out," Caleb rasped. Eli nodded. Caleb gave a bitter smile. "Guess you always were the fool with a conscience." "Guess so." Caleb's breath hitched. "They'll come for you next." "Let 'em." For a moment there was nothing but the sound of wind between them. Then Caleb's eyes went glassy, his chest still. Eli looked up at the burning cabin, its light flickering across the valley. He could feel the storm's cold settling into his bones. The land was erasing everything, the footprints, the blood, the names. He took one last breath of smoke and snow, then turned toward the creek bed, where a faint trail of footprints disappeared into the dark. The storm had no mercy that night. It tore across the open range, turning the world into a blur of white and wind. Eli moved through it like a ghost, one hand shielding his eyes, the other clutching the rifle against his chest. The cabin behind him burned bright against the dark, a dying star swallowed by snow. He didn't look back again. He followed the trail she'd left, a thin, crooked line already vanishing under the drifts. Each step cut through memory as much as snow, the sound of soldiers shouting, the smell of smoke from Canyon Ridge, the cries that never left his head. He had done what he could too late. He always did. Ahead, a flicker of movement broke the whiteness, a small fire, barely alive beneath a rocky ledge. He slowed, raising his rifle. Then he saw her. The Apache woman knelt beside the fire, the child wrapped in her arms. Her blanket was torn, the boy's face pressed against her shoulder. She looked up when he approached, eyes sharp, even through exhaustion. "You followed," she said, not as a question. "I had to make sure you made it," Eli answered. She stared at him a long time, then nodded toward the boy. "He's breathing. The cold hasn't won yet." He knelt by the fire, hands out toward the meager heat. The flames caught the edge of his face, painting the scars the wind couldn't hide. "Storm's breaking soon," he said quietly. "We can reach the river by morning." Her gaze didn't soften. "And then what? You give us to your lawmen?" He shook his head. "There's no law left for me." The wind hissed around them, curling through the rocks like something alive. The boy stirred, murmuring in half-sleep. She soothed him with a hum, a low rhythmic tune that didn't belong to words. It settled over them like a fragile shield. After a moment, she spoke again. "You were there, at Canyon Ridge." Eli's throat closed. "Yes. You rode with them when they came." He nodded once. Her eyes glimmered with firelight, wet and steady. "Did you know who they burned?" "I didn't until the smoke cleared," he said, "until I saw the children." She studied him, the silence cutting deep. "And now you think saving me will balance it?" "No," he said, "but maybe it's the only decent thing left to do." She turned her face toward the storm, the firelight dancing across her cheekbones. "You can't undo what was done, white man." "I know," he said softly, "but maybe we can bury what's still burning." For a long time, neither spoke. The wind eased, falling into a restless whisper. The fire crackled low, blue sparks drifting into the cold. Then the boy coughed, a dry, painful sound. Eli reached for his canteen, poured a little water into a tin cup. "Here," he said. "Let him sip." The woman hesitated, then took it. Their hands brushed. Her skin was cold, trembling. She guided the boy's lips to the rim. He drank greedily, small hands clinging to her wrist. When he finished, she handed the cup back. Eli looked at the child's face, thin, determined, alive. He got his mother's will. Her jaw tightened. "He got his father's blood." Eli frowned. "His father?" She stared at him then, long, unflinching, and something dangerous lived behind her eyes. "His father was your commanding officer." The world stopped. The fire popped once, spitting a coal into the snow. Eli blinked, slow. "My... what?" "You remember the raid," she said, voice flat. "You remember who gave the order?" He did. Colonel Raymond Hasker, the man who rode through the camp shouting for no prisoners. The man Eli had once called friend. Her next words landed like a knife. "I was his wife." Eli's breath hitched. "That's not possible." Her gaze didn't waver. "He took what he wanted, left when the smoke rose. When I escaped, I swore my son would never bear his name." Eli sat back hard against the rock, snow melting against his collar. The truth spun through him, sick and cold. "Then the army. They hunt us not because of what we did," she said, "but because of who he is. A general's bastard son doesn't belong in the dirt." Eli stared into the fire. His voice came rough, low. "Then I was right to burn the cabin." She tilted her head, studying him. "You burned more than a cabin, Cowboy. You burned your way out of your own war." He looked up, meeting her eyes. Maybe that's the only way to start over. The firelight flickered between them, carving lines of exhaustion and defiance across both faces. Outside, the storm finally began to die, leaving only the sound of distant thunder rolling over the ridge. The woman pulled the boy closer, whispering something Eli couldn't hear. He turned toward the darkness beyond the rocks, toward the faint outline of dawn breaking over the plains. Behind them, far off in the valley, another flame rose, a second column of fire where no house should be. The riders weren't done. He stood, loading another round into the rifle. "They're coming again." The woman looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then we run until the world forgets our names." He nodded once. "And if it doesn't, then we make new ones." The first light of dawn crawled over the plains like a wounded animal, pale, cold, uncertain. The storm had passed, but its ghosts lingered in every gust of wind. Eli led the way through the snow, rifle slung over one shoulder, his coat stiff with frost. Behind him, the Apache woman carried the boy, her steps silent, her breath measured. The fire of the night before had burned itself out, but the valley still glowed faintly from the ashes of what they'd left behind. Every few paces, Eli stopped to listen. The wind had changed. It no longer carried snow. It carried sound, metal, faint, but sure. Horses. He looked back. They're close. The woman adjusted the boy in her arms. How many? Too many. She didn't flinch. Then we keep walking. The land dropped away into a narrow ravine. He motioned for her to follow, sliding down the slope. Ice cracked beneath his boots, echoing off stone. At the bottom, a thin stream wound through the rocks, half frozen, glinting like a vein of glass. "Riverbed'll hide our tracks for a while," he said. She stepped into the icy water without hesitation, boots vanishing beneath the flow. The boy whimpered at the cold. Eli crouched, steadying them both. "Keep to the shadows," he whispered. "Don't stop." They moved through the narrow cut of earth, each step a whisper of defiance. The walls rose on either side, closing them off from the sky. Above, a hawk screamed, a warning, carried on the wind. Half a mile in, Eli stopped again. He crouched, fingers pressing against the wet stone. Tracks, fresh ones, cut into the mud ahead. Hoofprints, deep and clustered. The riders had split, circling to cut them off. "They know this land," he said. "So do I," the woman replied. She pointed to the east wall of the ravine, where a narrow path snaked upward between two slabs of stone. "That way leads to the mesas. If we reach the ridge, we see them before they see us." Eli glanced at the incline. Steep, icy, dangerous. "You sure?" Her answer was simple. "Do you have another idea?" He didn't. They began the climb. Eli went first, finding handholds where the rock jutted through frost. The woman followed, one arm around the boy, her other hand gripping the stone. The child didn't cry, just watched the sky with wide, dark eyes that seemed too old for their years. Halfway up, a rifle cracked. The shot sparked against the rock inches from Eli's boot. "Down!" he barked. The woman pressed herself against the cliff, shielding the boy. Another shot followed, then another. The riders had found them. Eli looked down. 4 shapes emerged from the riverbed, their coats dark, faces hidden under hats rimmed with frost. One carried a lantern swinging from the saddle. "There they are!" a voice shouted. Eli leveled his rifle, aimed low, and fired. One horse reared, screaming. The rider fell into the ice, not moving. The others scattered for cover. "Keep climbing!" he yelled. The woman's hand slipped once, caught again. "I can't carry him and climb." Eli slung his rifle over his shoulder and dropped lower. "Give him to me." Her eyes flashed. "You'll fall. Better me than him." For a moment, they stared at each other. 2 lives balanced between trust and the drop below. Then she lifted the boy toward him. Eli took the child carefully, tucking him against his chest. The boy shivered once, then went still, face buried in Eli's coat. "Now climb," he said. Together, they moved upward, one desperate grip after another. Bullets sparked off the rock around them, chunks of shale breaking loose. The wind screamed through the canyon like something alive. At last, Eli reached the top. He pulled the boy over, set him down, then leaned back to grab the woman's hand. She was trembling, her fingers slick with blood from the climb. He hauled her up, both of them collapsing against the cold earth. Below, the riders regrouped, shouting, "They're on the ridge." Eli rolled onto his knees, panting. "We've got one chance." The woman wiped sweat from her brow. "Which way?" He pointed toward the east, an endless stretch of red desert rising beyond the snow. "If we reach the dry wash by noon, they'll lose the trail." She looked at him, then at the boy. "And if we don't, then I'll make sure they never find you." Her voice dropped, rough with meaning. "You speak like a man already dead." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Most days I am—" The sound of hooves grew louder again. Eli loaded his last rounds. The woman adjusted the boy's blanket, her jaw set. He glanced toward her. "If I tell you to run—" She cut him off. "I don't run anymore." They locked eyes, a silent agreement sealed by exhaustion and something that felt too much like faith. The wind shifted, carrying the echo of pursuit closer. Eli rose you, rifle steady. Then we end this where the land still remembers mercy. The woman stood beside him, her face calm, unflinching. Together they faced the valley, the light of morning breaking through the smoke. Far below, the riders spread out, dark shapes crawling across the white plain. The boy stirred, whispering something Eli couldn't catch, just a single word in a language older than war. It sounded like hope. The sun clawed its way over the rim of the mesa, bleeding gold into the snow. It should have brought warmth, but it only painted the cold brighter. Eli stood near the edge of the ridge, eyes narrowed against the light. Below, the riders moved like ants across the valley floor, scattering through patches of fog. Their voices carried faintly, angry and eager. The hunt was closing in. He checked his rifle, 3 rounds left, enough to matter, not enough to win. Behind him, the woman crouched beside the boy, wrapping him tighter in the blanket. She glanced at Eli's hands. "You're shaking." He gave a dry laugh. "Too much blood in the cold." "No," she said quietly. "Too much guilt." He met her eyes, but said nothing. The truth had been spoken enough for one lifetime. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp against the wind. The land below stretched endless, rivers of white fading into red dust and the faint shimmer of mirage. If they could reach the far canyons by dusk, they might vanish for good. But the ridge was the only path that led there, and it would soon be crawling with men who'd kill first and question never. He turned to her. "There's a narrow pass about half a mile east. You'll find an old river cut. Follow it till the snow turns to sand." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not coming." He hesitated, then shook his head. "I'll hold them here." She stood slowly, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "You think dying buys forgiveness?" He looked out toward the valley, watching the dust rise where the riders were splitting apart, some climbing the slope already. "No," he said, "but it might buy time." She stepped closer. "For who? For me? For the boy? You don't owe us." Eli's jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong." The boy stirred, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His small hand clutched her coat. "Mama," he whispered. She knelt beside him, touching his face gently. "We're going to the sun, little one. Stay quiet." Eli crouched beside them both. "When you reach the wash, follow it south. There's an old trading post beyond the canyon. The man there owes me a debt." She studied his face, lined, cracked, smoke-stained. "You said you had no law." "I don't," he said. "Just promises." A sound broke through the wind, a rifle report far below. The first rider had spotted them. Eli rose, chambering around. "Time's done." The woman caught his wrist. "If you fall here, no one will remember your name." He gave her a faint smile. "Then make sure he remembers yours." For a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of trust, maybe even tenderness. Then she turned, lifting the boy into her arms, and began moving toward the eastern path. Eli watched them go until the cliffs swallowed their shapes. Then he faced the valley. The riders were climbing fast now, the first already within sight. He could see the glint of a badge on one man's chest, the same insignia he once wore, justice chasing its own ghost. He knelt behind a rock outcrop, steadying his rifle. The cold bit into his fingers. "Let's make this count," he muttered. The first rider crested the ridge. Eli fired. The man fell, tumbling backward into the snow. The second shouted, ducking low, returning fire. The bullet tore through Eli's sleeve, grazing his arm. He barely flinched. He reloaded, fired again. Another rider dropped, but they kept coming, relentless, shadows on horses cutting through light and smoke. He ducked behind the rocks, breath ragged. The last round slid into the chamber like a prayer. "That's it then," he whispered, "all square." The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, a woman's voice, far off, calling in Apache. The syllables rolled like thunder, a warning. Eli turned. At the far end of the ridge, a shape emerged from the glare. Not a rider, Caleb's horse, riderless, climbing the slope on instinct. The animal stopped near Eli, snorting steam, eyes wild. Eli touched its neck gently. Guess even ghosts don't rest easy. He swung into the saddle, wincing at the pull of his wound. The horse shifted beneath him, impatient. Below, the riders shouted, spreading out, rifles rising. Eli took one last look toward the east, where the woman and child were no longer visible. Then he nudged the horse forward toward the edge of the ridge. The drop was steep, 100 feet of rock and snow to the valley below. The only way down fast. He grinned, something fierce flickering through the exhaustion. Reckon we fly, then? He kicked his heels, and the horse leapt. For an instant, man and beast hung weightless above the white abyss. Then the world erupted. Snow, dust, chaos. Gunfire cracked, echoing against the cliffs. When the smoke cleared, only silence remained. Down in the ravine, hoofprints led away from the wreck, one set, limping but steady, heading east. The riders hesitated, scanning the ridge, uncertain whether to follow. Above them, the wind carried the faintest echo of a voice, low, steady, defiant. Keep moving. By mid-morning the storm had bled away, leaving a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The land changed with every mile, snow fading to dust, dust to red clay. The Apache woman moved slowly, her feet bleeding inside cracked boots. The boy slept against her shoulder, fever-warm but breathing. Behind them stretched a single set of footprints and the faint drag of something heavy, the weight of everything she'd lost. At the crest of the rise, she stopped. The mesa behind was a thin shadow now, distant, silent. No smoke, no riders, only wind. She stared until the horizon shimmered, half hoping to see a figure on horseback trailing after her. Nothing. She whispered his name once, not sure if it was a prayer or a curse. The boy stirred. "Mama, is he coming?" She hesitated. "He's finding another road." The child nodded sleepily, trusting. Children always did. She started down the slope toward the open desert. The sun pressed hard, the kind of heat that stripped a person of thought. When she reached the dry wash Eli had spoken of, she found water pooled in the bends, a narrow thread glinting under the light. She knelt, scooped a handful to her lips, then held some for the boy. It tasted of earth and iron, alive. From the far side of the canyon came a faint metallic echo. She froze. Hooves. Her heart kicked once hard, then steadied. She pressed the boy against the wall of the wash, crouching low behind the scrub. The sound grew clearer. Slow, limping steps. One horse, not a troop. Then she saw him. Eli. The horse stumbled into view, sides streaked with mud and sweat. Eli sat slumped in the saddle, hat gone, blood dried black down his arm. His face was pale beneath the dust, but his eyes were open, scanning the canyon like a man still deciding whether he belonged to the living. When he saw her, something like disbelief cracked through the weariness. "You made it," he said, voice rough as gravel. She rose, still holding the boy. "You fell." "Didn't stick the landing," he said with a ghost of a grin. She crossed the stream slowly, stopping a few paces away. "You should be dead." "Maybe I am," he said. "Feels about right." The boy reached toward him. "You came back." Eli looked at the child, then at her. "Couldn't leave without finishing what I started." She studied him, searching for the lie. "And what's that?" "Making sure you both see another sunrise." The boy slipped from her arms, ran to Eli's leg, clinging to his coat. Eli ruffled his hair gently, wincing at the motion. "You got your mother's stubborn." She watched, something unspoken tightening her throat. "The riders?" "Scattered," he said. "Storm took care of the rest. Maybe a few still out there, but not close. Then we move." He nodded, sliding off the horse with effort. His boots hit the sand and nearly gave out beneath him. She caught his arm before he fell. For a moment they stood like that, two broken silhouettes holding each other up against a sky too wide for forgiveness. "You can't keep walking like this," she said. "I don't got much choice." "There's always a choice," she murmured. He gave a dry laugh. "Says the woman who followed a stranger into a storm." She almost smiled. "I followed shelter, found something else." The boy tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, where do we go now?" Eli looked eastward. "Heard there's a town 3 days' ride from here." Quiet place. Folks don't ask names. Her eyes narrowed. And if they do, he shrugged. Then we make up better ones. They rested for a while beneath a crumbling bluff. The heat shimmered off the sand. Flies circled slow, lazy spirals. Eli cleaned his rifle. The woman stitched the tear in his sleeve with a strip from her hem. Neither spoke much. Words felt fragile after all the noise they'd survived. When the sun began to sink, she stood. We travel by night, less eyes. He nodded, pushing himself upright with a grunt. The boy clung to his hand, steadying him like a miniature guardian. For a moment, the sight almost made her believe in balance again. As they walked into the red dusk, the desert stretched infinite ahead of them. Behind, the wind rose one last time, carrying the faint echo of burning timber and horses screaming. The past wasn't done with them, but it was far enough to breathe. Eli glanced sideways. "When the boy's older, you tell him about his father." She looked straight ahead. "I'll tell him about the man who stayed when the others ran." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Hope that's enough." "It will be," she said, "if we make it to morning." The horizon burned orange, fading to violet. The three of them walked until the stars came out, silent, defiant shapes against the endless dark. Somewhere out there, the sound of a lone coyote broke the night, answering a question no one dared ask aloud. 3 nights later, the desert gave way to dust and wood smoke. The town sat low and mean against the horizon, a scatter of shacks and one crooked steeple, its bell long rusted silent. The sign half buried in sand read, "Redwater Junction." Letters faded to ghosts, a place where names didn't matter and memories dried out faster than rain. Eli stopped at the ridge, squinting through the glare. "Used to be a rail stop," he said. "Now it's just a grave with buildings." The woman shifted the boy on her hip. "Then it's a good place to disappear." "Only if the living let you," Eli muttered. They descended the hill slow, dust curling around their boots. Dogs barked somewhere behind a stable. A few men leaned in doorways, eyes tracking them without warmth. Eli's hand rested on the butt of his revolver, not in threat but habit. The woman walked straight, head high, refusing to shrink under the stairs. The boy clung to her skirt, wide-eyed at the sight of so many faces after so much silence. They reached the saloon first, a 2-story relic with a porch missing half its boards. A woman in a sun-bleached dress watched them from the upper window, cigarette smoke drifting from her fingers. Eli called up, "You still run this place in Mabel?" The woman squinted, then broke into a dry laugh. "Lord above, Eli Graves. Thought you were bones under the snow." "Not yet," he said. "Got any whiskey and mercy left?" "Plenty of the first, none of the second." She looked past him, eyes catching the Apache woman. "And who's your shadow?" Eli's tone flattened. "Family." Mabel studied them, then flicked her cigarette into the dust. "Then come inside before the dust eats you alive." The saloon smelled of tobacco and old regrets. A piano stood silent in the corner. A handful of drinkers turned to stare. Miners, drifters, one man with a deputy's badge that looked more rust than silver. Mabel poured 2 glasses, sliding one across the counter. "You've got trouble hanging off you like smoke, Eli. Storm coming." He took a sip. "Already passed." The Apache woman stood by the doorway, wary. The boy stared at the mirror behind the bar, fascinated by his own reflection, something he'd never seen so clearly before. She touched his shoulder. "Stay close." Mabel's gaze softened just a touch. "How long you planning to stay?" Eli set the glass down. "Long enough to breathe. Maybe find work. Quiet kind." Mabel snorted. "Ain't no quiet work left west of the river." He shrugged. "Then I'll make some." A door opened at the far end of the saloon. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, coat clean, eyes sharp with authority. The badge on his chest wasn't rusted. "You'd be Eli Graves," he said. Eli's spine straightened. "Depends who's asking." "Marshal Henry Lyle. Got word a few nights ago. Deserters, raiders, and a burned-out cabin up north. Sound familiar?" Mabel's face tightened. The room went still. Eli didn't move. "Can't say it does." The marshal's eyes flicked to the woman beside him. "That your wife? She's who she says she is." The marshal stepped closer, boots echoing on the boards. We found a soldier's body near the ridge. Army badge, bullet wound. Yours, maybe. Eli's jaw clenched. Storm took a lot of things. Lyle's gaze lingered a moment longer. Then he smiled thin. Don't go far. Folks round here don't like strangers that come carrying ghosts. He turned and left, the saloon's doors swinging in his wake. Eli exhaled slow, rubbing his temples. Should have known peace was too much to ask. Mabel poured him another drink. He's new blood. Tries to clean a town that don't want cleaning. You best keep to the edge, Eli. Take your family and move before he remembers where he's seen that woman's face. Eli looked at the Apache woman, her expression unreadable. He won't need to remember. The world doesn't forget her kind. She met his gaze without fear. Then we walk again. The boy tugged her sleeve. I'm tired of walking. Eli crouched beside him. You hold on a little longer, kid. We're almost someplace safe. The child frowned. Where's safe? Eli had no answer. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The sun dipped behind the ridge, setting the sky on fire again. Mabel leaned on the bar, voice low. You can't outrun what's chasing you, Eli. You can only decide where to face it. He stared into the empty glass. Then I reckon it'll find me here. The woman touched his shoulder. If it does, you won't stand alone. He looked up, and for the first time in years, something almost like peace flickered across his face. Didn't figure I would. From outside came the sound of hooves, steady, organized, soldiers, the marshal's voice barking orders. The boy pressed against his mother's leg. Eli stood, eyes darkening. Guess the storm's not done after all. The thunder of hooves rolled through Redwater Junction, echoing between the warped buildings like judgment. Mabel's lantern swung from a nail behind the bar, light trembling against the bottles. Eli stood by the window, one hand resting on the frame, eyes hard as iron. Out in the street, the soldiers dismounted, 6 men in grey dust and faded blue, led by Marshal Lyle. They moved with purpose, rifles ready, faces set in the expression of men who decided how the story should end. Mabel's voice broke the silence. You bring the war with you again, Eli? He didn't turn. Seems the war follows whoever remembers it. The Apache woman stood near the back, the boy clinging to her skirt. Her face was calm but pale. Only her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. They'll take him, she said softly. They always take what they can't understand. Eli loaded his revolver, checked the chamber, then slipped it back into its holster. Not while I'm breathing. Mabel poured another drink and shoved it toward him. That's for courage, or farewell. He left it untouched. Outside, the marshal's voice rose. Eli Graves, step out and turn over the Apache woman. The army wants her alive. Eli exhaled through his nose, steady. Alive for what? For justice, came the answer. He smiled without humor. Funny how your kind keeps changing what that word means. He turned to the woman. Take the boy and get upstairs. Back window opens over the alley. When you hear the bell, run for the ridge. Her brow furrowed. And you? I'll be the noise that lets you go. She hesitated, then pressed a hand against his chest. You fight every battle like you're trying to lose. He met her gaze. Maybe I just fight the ones that matter. Their eyes held for one long heartbeat. Then she turned, leading the boy up the narrow stairs. The boards creaked under her weight, each step fading until only the wind filled the gaps. Eli faced the door. The marshal called again. Last warning! He pushed the saloon doors open, stepping out into the dust and sun. The street was empty except for soldiers and silence. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, hands resting easy on his gun belt. Lyle's jaw tightened. You should have kept running. Eli shrugged. Ran out of map. The soldiers fanned out, rifles glinting. Where is she? Lyle demanded. Eli looked him dead in the eye. Gone. Lyle's lip curled. That's a lie. Then prove it, Eli said. You want her, you'll have to kill me first. The marshal hesitated. For a moment, the weight of history hung between them. 2 men who'd both buried too much in the same soil. You can't save her, Graves. You never could. Maybe not, Eli said, "but I can stop you from writing the rest." He moved first. The street exploded with sound, gunfire cracking, glass shattering, dust lifting in furious clouds. Eli ducked behind the trough, firing once, twice. 2 soldiers fell. Another fired from the roof of the livery. Eli's return shot caught him clean. The world narrowed to the rhythm of his heartbeat and the echo of each round. Mabel's saloon bell clanged once, then again. The signal. Upstairs, the woman lifted the boy through the window. He hesitated, eyes wide. "Mama, go!" she hissed, pushing him gently. "Run to the ridge, just like he said." The child dropped into the alley, small feet hitting dirt, and vanished behind a stack of crates. She climbed after him, skirts catching on the sill, and dropped into the dust below. Back on the street, the fight raged. Eli reloaded, hands slick with sweat and blood. He saw movement by the well. Lyle crouched, pistol ready. "It didn't have to be this way," the marshal shouted. Eli stood, voice calm. "It always had to be this way." Both men fired. The shots rang out almost together. Lyle fell first, his badge spinning into the dust. Eli staggered, pressing a hand to his side where the bullet had torn through. He stumbled backward, breath ragged, eyes finding the horizon. At the edge of the town, the woman appeared, the boy at her side. She stopped when she saw him sway. Eli raised a hand, motioning toward the hills. "Keep going," he rasped. The soldiers still standing aimed their rifles, shouting. The woman turned, fury flashing across her face. She snatched the marshal's dropped gun and fired twice. Both men fell before they reached their triggers. Silence swallowed the town again. The wind picked up, stirring dust and ash. The church bell creaked once in the breeze, then stilled. She ran to him, kneeling in the dirt. His blood soaked the sand, dark beneath her hands. "Stay awake," she said. Eli smiled faintly. "You made it." She shook her head. "Not yet." His gaze drifted toward the endless sky. "Doesn't matter. The boy's safe." Her voice broke. "You think this erases what happened?" "No," he whispered. "But it's a start." He reached for her hand, fingers trembling, then went still. The sun dropped behind the ridge, throwing their shadows long across the dirt road. The boy stood a few steps away, watching without sound. The woman bowed her head, lips moving in a prayer that belonged to no church. The desert sun had faded to a muted orange, casting long shadows over Redwater Junction. The street was empty now, except for the 3 of them, Eli, the Apache woman, and the boy. Smoke drifted lazily from the remnants of the saloon, a ghostly reminder of the night's chaos. Every footstep they had taken had left marks in the dust, and every breath seemed heavy with the weight of survival and choices made in fire and blood. Eli leaned against the side of a half-collapsed building, hand pressed to his wound. The pain was sharp, relentless, but it was nothing compared to the memories, the screaming, the smoke, the children that hadn't made it. He closed his eyes, seeing the boy's small face pressed against his coat, hearing the mother's whispered words as they had climbed the cliff. The moment stretched, time slowing, each second a hammer striking the spine of his conscience. The woman knelt beside him, gently brushing dirt and ash from his hair. Her hands were steady, calm, but there was fire in her eyes, anger, determination, and a raw clarity that seemed to cut through the smoke. "You've done enough, Eli," she said. "The rest is ours to bear." He shook his head. "I couldn't leave you, him, to the wind." His voice broke, raw and ragged. "Not after everything." She reached out, touching his face, then holding his hand in hers. "You did what you could. The rest is life." The boy tugged at her skirt. "Mama, what now?" She looked down, then across the desert where the horizon shimmered like a promise. "Now we live. Now we decide what to be." Eli's chest rose and fell, sweat and blood mingling on his skin. He tried to stand, legs trembling beneath him, but she caught him with a firm grip. "Not yet," she whispered. "You're stronger than the night, but even the strongest man needs breath." They sat together in silence, the wind carrying the distant cries of crows, the faint rustle of tumbleweeds, and the last echoes of gunfire from the ridge. The land around them was quiet now, neutral, impartial, waiting for the next choice. Eli's gaze wandered to the horizon. The past, it doesn't leave, does it? His words were soft, almost a confession. No, she said gently, but it doesn't have to define the future. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath, feeling the weight of every act, every loss, every life he could not save. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder. Redemption isn't given. It's carved, step by step, breath by breath. And you, her eyes softened, you've already carved it. A shadow moved across the street, a lone rider, distant, uncertain. Eli tensed, hand instinctively brushing his rifle, but the figure passed, disappearing into the desert. No one remained to claim what they had lost, no one to force them back into the violence. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was theirs. The boy yawned, leaning against his mother. She held him close, swaying gently, grounding them in the moment, in the life they still had. Eli stood slowly, supporting himself on the wall. Pain flared in his side, but he ignored it, breathing in the dry air of a desert washed clean by wind and survival. He looked at the woman, who met his gaze with something that had been absent in this land for far too long. Trust, not blind, not naive, but earned through shared danger, shared suffering, and shared hope. Eli finally allowed himself a small, crooked smile. Then we keep walking, she nodded, step by step. The boy pressed his small hand into Eli's palm. For the first time in months, he felt a measure of safety, not certainty, not peace, but the fragile promise of life beyond fire and blood. The wind carried their shadows long across the sand, stretching toward the horizon. Together they moved forward, footprints sinking into dust that would one day erase their passage, but never the bond forged in the storm, in fire, in survival. Each step was quiet, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. Above, the sky burned with the last of sunset, red, gold, and violet blending into night. It was a sky that had witnessed loss, rage, courage, and love, and now, for the first time in a long while, it bore witness to a fragile beginning. Eli lifted the boy onto his shoulders for a moment, then gently handed him back to the woman. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low, "we decide who we want to be." She smiled faintly, tired but unwavering. "Tomorrow," she echoed. The stars began to appear, pale against the deepening sky, as if the universe itself was acknowledging survival, sacrifice, and the first step toward redemption. And as they walked into the gathering night, the desert embraced them, silent, endless, and waiting for the stories still to be written. The desert had settled into night, quiet and vast. Redwater Junction lay behind them, like a memory half-burned, the remnants of violence swallowed by sand and wind. Eli, the Apache woman, and the boy walked steadily through the shadowed mesa, footprints stretching behind them, soon to vanish under the desert's impartial sweep. Each step carried the weight of loss, survival, and the fragile hope they now shared. Eli's side ached, and every breath reminded him of the battles fought, both outside and within. But in the woman's steady gaze and the boy's tentative smiles, he found a measure of peace he had not known in years. The horizon ahead glimmered with the faint promise of life beyond war, beyond vengeance, a life they could shape together. The Apache woman moved close, her hand brushing his as they walked. "We survived," she whispered. "That's a start." He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. A start worth fighting for. They crested the final ridge before dawn, the world awash in pale light. Behind them, the desert seemed to exhale, bearing witness to courage, choices, and the unspoken bond that now held them together. Though the past would always whisper, the future lay open, vast and theirs to claim. Together, they descended into the valley below, shadows stretched long, merging with the first rays of sun. And in that quiet moment, Eli understood something he had never before. Survival was not just about enduring, it was about carrying forward, protecting those you loved, and learning that redemption could be found in the smallest acts of courage. If you've been moved by Eli's struggle, the Apache woman's courage, and the boy's fragile hope, don't let their story end here. Click subscribe to follow their journey as they carve a new life across the unforgiving frontier. Witness how every choice, every act of care, and every step into the unknown shapes their future in ways no one could foresee. Turn on notifications to experience the next chapter of survival, trust, and redemption the moment it unfolds. Share the story with friends who crave tales of bravery, resilience, and quiet heroism, and leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if faced with impossible choices and relentless pursuit? The journey doesn't end with survival. It begins with hope. And together we can walk these treacherous plains side by side, learning that even in a land carved by conflict, new beginnings are possible.